Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about one of the big issues that we run into for novice lifters versus advanced lifters, and that has to do with exercises that load the spine. And it's going to be funny because there are times when it's going to sound so contradictory, like when we talk about my own training, right? A lot of what I do these days is very carefully select exercise, and I spend a lot of time worrying about axial loading and too much loading on my spine and which exercises I can afford to get away with it and still get enough training volume. And even to the point where I'm doing stuff like all these belt squats, like you see me doing there, so that I can completely unload my spine, get more hypertrophy work for my quads and lower body, so that I can get away with doing more deadlifting, right? And then you go over to the novice lifter, and I'm like, no, you guys need to be focused on overhead presses, standing presses, squats, deadlifts, large amounts of that stuff, right? And I'm always like, you need to do your exercises standing. You need to be loading your spine. And this can be very confusing for a lot of people who are observing what very advanced lifters do sometimes versus more novice lifters and what's even advised to them. And what people need to realize, a lot of it has to do with how much training fatigue can you recover from versus training stimulus that gives you benefits. Because here's one of the take-home messages. Anything that loads your spine heavily has its own recovery element that has to be dealt with in addition to the muscle fatigue, right? Because fatiguing muscle tissue with training has a recovery component, but compressing your spine has a separate recovery component, and it's system-wide. And the problem we run into is that novice lifters really don't need to worry about the latter so much. And what I mean is that novice lifters just are not strong, right? You're not strong. Look, if you're a healthy young man and you barely squat 225 and you can overhead press 105 pounds for a few reps, you're just not strong, right? You're not strong. You don't have any work capacity and you have no strength. Therefore, the amount of weight that you're capable of loading on your spine for any appreciable volume just really isn't that significant. Now, it might feel significant. You might be like, what are you talking about, man? I did 5 reps with 300 pounds on the deadlift and it felt so heavy on my back, right? And that's true, it did. It felt heavy. But as far as your spine goes from a training standpoint, it wasn't really that bad, right? Your bones, your spine can handle a hell of a lot more than that. And it'll adapt to that pretty quickly because you also are still in that novice phase where you adapt to everything really, really fast and really easily. It just isn't that big of a deal, right? I mean, it would be the same for me. Like for me as a more advanced athlete, I would never be worried about any amount of volume I could do with 300 pounds on a deadlift, right? That's not even a warm-up. You guys have seen me do, I think, 12 reps with well over 400 pounds of more on a deadlift. I mean, it's just not that big of a deal. It's not that much weight. To the novice, it seems like it. And that's the point. You guys just are not strong enough at that point to worry about this. You're not strong enough to worry about it. You can't generate enough load for this to be an issue. So for the novice lifter, all these big structural exercises are fantastic because they have an enormous training stimulus. I mean, anything where you're standing on your feet, where your spine is loaded, it's a structural lift, has an enormous amount of muscle fibers involved, right? It's training you to use your entire body as one unit. I mean, a squat, a deadlift, a overhead press, any of those, even a barbell row standing, right? You're using your whole body as a unit. You are loading enormous amounts of stabilizers, right? You're getting a massive training effect if you're progressing on it. It's going to help you gain muscle at a tremendous rate. Your strength will be going up, your work capacity will be going up, everything is golden. In fact, most novice lifters don't do enough of these exercises, right? Most people who are in the gym playing around, they wonder why they don't make all the gains they want to make, or they don't reach the standards a lot of us say, hey, this is what you should be doing. It's because you're not doing enough of these big exercises. They're not doing enough of them. But what eventually happens, if you do make all those gains, we start to run into an issue on the other end of it eventually, to where there is a recovery downside to this stuff. Once you do get stronger, it starts to get harder to recover from these things with even comparable amounts of volume. Or what about increased volume, right? Because what do we know about training volume? That volume is a factor in the amount of hypertrophy that you gain. We also know that the more advanced you get, the minimum effective volume that you need to disrupt the homeostasis in your body continues to go up and up and up. Right now, drugs can skew these things, and that's one of the things people need to remember. People say, well, then what about these world's strongest man competitors? Well, these guys with massive frames who have an enormous amount of drugs in their system that help with recovery, well, that's a different ballgame. You're talking about guys with massive frames. Talking about guys with massive food intakes to facilitate better recovery because they're not even worried about getting fat. Guys on massive cocktails of drugs that speed up recovery, improve bone density. Right? A lot of these drugs even increase bone mineralization. It just puts minerals directly into their spine. Well, that's a different ballgame. Everybody else, you're going to have limits. And as you get bigger and as you get stronger, it becomes harder and harder to make your body adapt because your body's resistant to it. The amount of work that you have to do will continue to go up forever to disrupt the homeostasis enough in your body to cause adaptation. Well, eventually what happens, we start looking at, hey, I can't do tons and tons of deadlifting and push presses. Right? We start having problems with this stuff. We can only handle so much of it. And in fact, we might start needing a lot more training volume than we can actually recover from on those exercises. We have to start using other stuff. And before long, you start finding this is one reason bob squats are popular in certain powerlifting circles. Because they allow you to use a lighter weight and get the same amount of muscle fiber recruitment. You're loading a slightly lighter weight on the spine. And as silly as it sounds, people will feel like, what, it's like, what, 10% less? Yeah, that's 10% less total axial loading volume compressing down on the spine over the course of 10 sets or 15 sets. That 10% is 10% less training fatigue that you have to recover from in terms of, again, loading on your spine. That starts to matter. We start getting to the point to where we're telling all the novice lifters and intermediates, you need to do nothing but standing barbell rows, do pin leg rows, it's fine. To where we're going, I don't know, man, too many rows are starting to interfere with your deadlift recovery. You can't deadlift as much. At a certain threshold. In fact, you start seeing a lot of champion powerlifters at a certain point. Their deadlifting is all the recovery they can handle on their lower back. They have to they let them do machine rows. They start doing dumbbell rows, like on a bench. These bodybuilder type movements that normally we would laugh at and tell the novice lifter, you need to be loading your spine. Well, when a guy is deadlifting 700 pounds for reps every week, his spine is having about all the loading it can handle. But they still sometimes need this extra stimulation. We need this extra training volume. Things like a belt squat start to make a lot of sense. It's the reason people invented one-legged exercises, by the way, for the very reason you use a belt squat. The belt squat works better. Why? To reduce loading on the spine and still get leg hypertrophy. Because a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, right? And we get great movement patterns from doing that back squat. Great movement pattern from doing that conventional deadlift. Of course we do. But it has a recovery component. And we also have to look at, how much practice do you need on an exercise to get good at it? Can you use other exercises to thicken up those same muscles that will help you lift more weight on it and do just enough on that big exercise to maintain the movement pattern? Can you use easier to recover from exercises to continue to thicken all the muscles up involved? All right, because at a certain point, you only need so many reps a week to master an exercise. If you've been doing a back squat for 5 years straight, you probably have the movement pattern down. You don't need that many reps of it every week to maintain perfect form, right? But you sure need to get bigger. You need bigger quads. You need bigger glutes. You need thicker thoracic erectors. You need stronger abductors. You need all these things to be bigger. So this is the problem you run into as you get more and more advanced. This is why exercise variation for these things does matter more. It's an issue of training fatigue and spinal compression and axial loading versus getting enough training volume to keep growing. Right? There's a balance to be had, and the exercise selection starts to become different. The very things that you throw at the novice lifter to give them the best gains possible we can't do infinite amounts of anymore, and we sometimes need almost infinite amounts the more advanced you get, right? Because training loads need to go up, not down, as you get bigger and stronger in order to continue to make progress. So that's why sometimes there can be a contradiction in this. This is something that people need to understand, that there's a big difference between exercise selection for a novice lifter and a more advanced lifter. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.